Start with you, Mr. Duke.
Okay.
Yes.
My voice is so loud that I probably don't need a microphone.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's very good to be here. So, my name, as he said, is Duke Fokuo, although I had to correct my last name. I was born in Ghana, and I had the privilege of going to school at the University of Iowa. I studied economics over there as my bachelor's, and then I had an MBA from Metropolitan State University. I work now for a company called Syngenta. You probably have heard of Syngenta, or otherwise you may have heard of our competitor, Monsanto. So Syngenta, we manufacture chemicals and seeds that farmers grow or used to grow items, right? So the corn and the soybeans and maybe even the rice that we ate today with the tomatoes and all that, it's more than likely something that our engineers came up with, or Monsanto's engineers came up with, right? So the chemical and agricultural manufacturers in the world are not many. I think that now has consolidated to about maybe 4. So Syngenta, Monsanto, Bayer, Pioneer, I think this Dow, and I'm forgetting one. But anyway, I'm a finance manager for one of the asset groups at Syngenta. Our office is right here in Minneapolis, although we have a global headquarters in Basel, Switzerland. And my job really is corporate finance. And without getting too much into it, it centers a lot around forecast planning and analysis. So essentially, are we making money? And the kind of strategies that my team and I can partner with marketing teams and sales organizations and production and supply folks within Syngenta to really bring our product from R&D, research and development, to market, to the commercial space, sell it, and then really make money. We have a big role to play in the world in terms of feeding the global population. And much of the work that I do goes to make sure that we are profitable. And of course, with that, Syngenta then is able to do a lot more charitable work. So that's just a little about me.
Wow, how do I follow that up? Thank you. Really, it's an honor to be up here with you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ian Owundo. Originally from Uganda. I've lived in the U.S. since 2002, happily married. And I work for the Democratic Party, the Minnesota Democratic Party. I am one of the director. I'm a civic engagement director. So essentially, not to bore you with the politics, that means that I get to work with a lot of politicians from the governor's office all the way to city council. But what I really enjoy about my work is that I get to work in the community. I get to connect with communities of color. I get to connect with marginalized communities, and that is all the way from Asian brothers and sisters to African brothers and sisters to African American brothers. I mean, you name it. And I do that on a daily basis. And I'm happy to be here. Kevin, when Kevin reached out to me, I've been following what Kevin's been up to. And when he reached out to me and he said, you know what, Ian, I want you to be a part of this. In a heartbeat, usually I will try to kind of hesitate, but just like I think a lot of us here, when it comes to anything that has to do with our motherland, I'm in. Period. So it's an honor to be here tonight. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alma. I'm originally from Togo, and the people from Togo in the room will tell you that Alma basically tells you that I'm a female and I was born on Saturday. So the people that know me well will mostly call me Ellie, which is my middle name. I've been in the US for about 22 years now, and I tend to drag my husband along whenever he wants to follow me, and today was one of those lucky days. So right now he's hiding behind his camera trying to take a picture. And I'm into government. I've been working for the state of Minnesota, namely the Department of Human Services, for about 17 years now, in a variety of positions. I interestingly started in the HIV/AIDS division. Most people think that when it comes to HIV prevention and care, it happens at the Department of Health. Newsflash, it's actually the Department of Human Services that takes care of the care portion. And I happen to have worked in the world of HIV/AIDS since I was 16 back home in Togo, because my best friend tended to have died of it when we graduated high school. And it was a striking blow, so I decided to talk about it, even though that was the time where nobody wanted to talk about it. So that landed me my first day job when I got to the US, and after that I spent the majority of my career in refugee resettlement, did a stint in operations and child support, and currently I'm the project manager for a project that we named aptly life skills. It has to do with the vaping epidemic that is affecting a lot of our teenagers, because the big tobacco companies have figured out that a lot of the adults are quitting. So they have to use very pervasive ways to reach our youth. So that's my newest passion, and that's something that I intend to do for quite a bit of time. So besides that, I also own a consulting company that deals in different areas with the federal government related to education, financial literacy, health, and all sort of things. As a state employee, I'm restricted as to which consulting I can do, which nonprofits, so I tend to work more with businesses and the federal government. The reason that I might be on this panel today may be because of the fact that Kevin likes me. I'm kidding. But also because I have a lot of ideas related to education, financial literacy, and other things that we could do to get the motherland ready for us, because I tend to believe that even though we might be ready for it, it may not be ready for us yet. So I'm grateful to be here.
My name is Kwame Silva. I was originally from Ghana. I've been here for 14 years. Did my undergrad in electrical engineering at the University of Minnesota. Then did my master's in data science. So I've been working within the data world for roughly 2 years. And then when Kevin approached me about his idea, and I just fell love into it, because I thought there's so much that I can give some of us who have had so much experience in the industry can help to make Africa a better place in terms of the way the developed country is approaching. So I think there's so much that we can do for our motherland. So I just wanted to join and help out with the information that I have. So that's why I'm here. So hopefully things go as we plan.
Thank you guys for wow, that's a rich background, I must say. And when I listen to your backgrounds, it just kind of gives me hope, because this is 4 of you here, and think of how many of this rich background is out there, the millions of us here. And yet we look at Mother Africa, and there's the challenges everywhere in all of these sectors, in agriculture, in the government and politics, in education. The education system is just crumbling, right? And technology is kind of scratching the surface in Africa, if you will. And we're still trying to figure out how can technology really enhance and promote us to grow economically and in all these other areas. So I'm gonna have, I know Kevin kind of gave me these questions, but I'm just gonna kind of drill into it a little bit more and kind of get the heart out of it. We want your heart, because some of the things that held us back is our frankness in addressing the issues in the motherland. We like to talk the talk, but we don't want to walk it. We want to just come and we blow all of this. We have so many ideas, but I want us to be very practical. Are these ideas feasible? Can you be in a position where you say, yeah, I can be able to take a step, I can do this. It's the action that's missing. So in your own line of work, right, I just want you guys to kind of tell me how you see your expertise, your influence being in that sector, or how can that be useful
in addressing some of the issues that we have in Africa today. Duke, you talked about working for this big agricultural corporation, and we eat their stuff. We eat your stuff every day, and we like it. And unfortunately, most of it goes to trash. But that said, in Africa, we struggle with agriculture. We struggle with getting good yielding seeds and education in how to be able to grow crops that are nutritive or that can yield more production. So how in your area are you? Do you see that it can come alongside to help Africa in this case?
So I'm going to try and be as frank as I can be tonight about the challenges that we face and how we can solve the problem. And the reason that I'm saying that, and I appreciate you kind of adding on. So before I answer the question, let me just quickly segue. In my family, we have people with abundance of degrees. Ghana, probably not as much as Nigeria, for instance, is huge on degrees, PhDs and master's degrees and so on and so forth. And yet, we're not going anywhere, right? Or we haven't gone as far as we want to go to. So we need 1,000 of Kevins and 1,000 of all of these guys. I'm just the finance guy. I don't really matter. I just come in once the ideas are set in place and so on. And in my family, we have a platform where all of the nieces and the nephews and the uncles, all these people are on the platform. And we have folks that are as old as 75 and some as young as like maybe 16 on there. And what we ran into as we talk about any issues is the elder folks, right? Pulling phrases like small boy. If you grew up in Ghana, you heard of that phrase. Meaning, you almost don't matter, right? So if we're going to make a difference, regardless of our backgrounds in anything that we're going to do in Africa, we are going to, first of all, have to break the culture that sort of inhibit the youngins or the younger professionals and the young mind to come into place and to do so. That's just a quick segue. Now, in terms of, in my profession, how we can help the continent, or I can just focus on Ghana for 1 minute. I'm one of those folks, when I go to Ghana, you see me in my shorts, t-shirts, and literally flip-flops. And I'm one of those guys that I will hail a taxi or jump on one of these bone shakers, I call it. Probably not safe. And I will go to the marketplaces. I went to this place where my mom used to sell things, and it's like this big open market in a place called Kumasi. And over there, I saw this table, no, not a table, on just the dirt floor was this heap and pile of tomatoes. Just tomatoes that had just gone rotten. And I said to myself, somebody's actually dying tonight somewhere in Ghana because they didn't have food to eat. And because the refrigeration system is not there, the preservation system is not there, that tomato is just going to go to waste. Folks like myself can work with R&D, research and development folks, to come up with technology, in terms of the seed technology, that actually prolongs how long it takes for a biological organism to decompose or to go from good to bad, right? And we can also work with folks in terms of planning, in terms of financing, that would help a place like Ghana be able to produce its food, but better yet, store the food, right? We don't need to get into the sort of the processed food and sort of the different concepts, but we can keep the organic stuff that we have and we can feed a lot more people. I'll let the other panelists talk, but those are some of the things that we can do, right? So my mind quickly goes to, how do we finance it? And how do we make it profitable, right? You see this kente cloth that Ama is wearing? It started, maybe I'm wrong, you guys correct me. It started in Ghana at a place called, I think it's Kintampo or something like that. Bone Ring.
Yeah.
Thank you. And these people literally sit there with this sort of big machine made out of wood. And they literally weave these threads together. And that has been around since I was, way before I was born. I'm 45 years old. And somehow we
It's
haven't,
still around, by the way.
it's around, but we haven't really turned it into an industry. Finance folks can help with that vision.
Wow. I think I'm just going to let the experts, when it comes to the main question that you asked, kind of answer that. I'm going to stay within what I feel comfortable with, which is, really policy and politics, and which is very necessary when it comes to developing our continent, because I think there's a way that we do business in Africa, and there's a way that business is done here, and a lot of that comes here, and it just doesn't work. I will kind of touch on what you said, which I believe is a gap between the younger generation and the older generation. And I don't think that's just in Ghana. I think that's an African thing. Where you have the older generation, again, still feeling and thinking like they did back home, except they're doing it over here. Where you have elders calling us small boy, young boy.
At age 45.
At age 45, and everything that you're doing, you're being called small boy. And I think for me, that is, again, where we are missing the mark. Where we need to realize that there's so much talent and there's so much that can be done if only, in my opinion, we just get out of our own way. And I'll just stop there for now.
I think I'm going to move a little bit into the business of informing and transforming. So let's take the example of refugees when they come here into the United States. They literally come with the clothes on their back, right? They've lost everything in some kind of war, they've been displaced, they've moved into another country, a host country, they've lived in a camp, they've been interviewed, they've jumped through different hoops where in their mind they were coming into. They have to find a job, they have to find housing, transportation is an issue, and there is very limited fund, actually $900 per person, for them to get all that going. Thankfully, depending on which city or state you land into, you might get help or some kind of assistance from refugee resettlement agencies. The help is limited, much more limited depending on which political power is in place right now. They come in. Whatever little help they get, they're resilient enough to get that housing, to get that employment. They are the only category beside the asylees, victims of severe forms of trafficking, human and Haitian entrants, to have the same benefits as United States citizens because they're invited by the government. That gives them a little leg up, not a whole lot. But it just so happened that the data shows that within 2 years, they exit all forms of public assistance ahead of all races. I'm including whites, blacks, Asians, whichever ones in there. What do they do to get that resilient? They get informed, they get transformed. Those are experiences that we can draw from and bring home. Not necessarily the same way, but based on the realities of our countries, figuring out what the issue is, what is the social background. I actually went to school to become a diplomat. That's what my dad sent me to France for. Get your doctoral degree in international law and finance, and then become a diplomat. It just so happened that I got married, got here, and figured out that no matter what it is that you need to do, it doesn't matter what degrees you have, you figure it out and you get there. Things happen differently depending on what background, what society you live in. But it just so feels, I haven't visited all African countries, but the ones that I've been to, it feels like the social construct doesn't really exist, or if it does, it belongs to a few, a chosen few. For me, we need to start there. The second thing that I can discuss endlessly with my husband and some people that I associate with is our education system. It doesn't make sense to me. We have gotten to the point where we basically colonize ourselves. We talk about independence since the 1960s, but we literally are only independent on paper. And I'm going to stop here because I know we're going to talk more about this.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
So with my background coming in as electrical engineering and transitioning to data science, the interesting thing is, we have all these brilliant ideas that we want to help. It looks like it's more of, you look in the cloud and you can see these brilliant ideas and hope that it just happens, right? But then there's the other side of it, where you might have the ideas, you might go back home, hoping you get the right people to help you out, establish that. And then it comes into a reality. And so when Kevin told me about this, it's like, okay, yeah, you know what? We can get different pilot programs. We have so many issues back home, especially with the idea of data. When it comes to data science, data engineering. We lack in data. We can't be able to store data. We can't collect data. What can we do to be able to make this thing very easy? Okay, yes, we have a group of engineers who can do that. How can we get people back home to be able to make this a reality? Now, the interesting thing is, you sit here and you imagine all this stuff. It's going to happen. You go back home, it's a whole different story. A whole different story. And so you might be setting up this Engineer Africa thing, and you have all these beautiful programs. When you go back home and try to establish it, it's not going to work. Right? So how are you going to do that? How are you going to get the people back home to sell the ideas to them? That, hey, I got people here who can make this a reality. And that's the difficulty we face right now. We have the ideas. We have the experience. We have the expertise. The data engineers, the data scientists. We can do a lot. We go back home, and it's very, very difficult. And so right now we are trying to build these pilot programs and go and get the right connection to be able to make this thing come to reality. That's right on the big picture right now. And if we can do that, so much to change. But until then, it's just on a piece of paper.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
If I may just
please.
add a little bit to what you just said. I think what you're really trying to get to the root of is an entire, and we were talking about this, an entire cultural shift. We have a cultural shift that we are, I believe, undergoing our own selves as a diaspora community here in the Western, countries. But I think there also has to be an entire cultural shift back home in order for these two worlds that we're trying to weave together to work. So.
Thank you all so much for that great response. I believe that if you don't know who you are, or if you don't know the use of anything, you're going to use that thing abnormally. And that becomes what they call abuse. And that includes ourselves. If you don't know who you are, you're going to abuse yourself. So I think maybe that's something that's going on here is discovering, to an extent, who we are here, moving from Africa. What's the new African man in the diaspora is, the African woman in the diaspora is a challenge in our community, in our society today. And they're trying to figure out themselves. Because of this, again, cultural shifting, and the dynamics are different. And now, with also the influence from the West to the world, to back home, they're also trying to grapple with that. And so that's something to keep in mind, and that's something that I think we should address. But, that first question was to nail down in terms of resources, and that could be, capital in any form, intellectual, material, whatever it is, coming from our connections. Now, this country is built by people that sacrifice and they work together, connected, and resources becoming available. And I think that this question was to address that whole issue, that how are we in our own capacity where we work, in our own experiences, in our professional background, what can we actually say personally, like, look, yes, I can be able to tap into my core of engineers and connect them to the extension workers in Ghana and see how we can start a pilot program and training the farmers, rural farm. That's something practical. That's something we can put our finger to it, right? And we can go from there. Again, it's moving past the talk. That's the whole thing. And you guys have great expertise, and thank you for your questions. But we're going to move ahead and talk about other issues for the sake of time. this other challenge that we're talking about resources in this case, and when you look back home, the idea, the perspective is, oh, help is going to come from abroad, right? I think, for example, I have a huge extended family back home. It was Christmas. Guess what? I got more than 200 phone calls, and they all depend on me to send money to finance their Christmas activities. Amazing. Amazing.
And then you have to go and get a call.
So the question now becomes, so without us, are we saying that Africa is doomed? Are there no resources within Africa that we can say could be the solution to this whole problem?
I think I was going to tell panelists. Let's go first.
My quick response is you become what you allow, reinforce, disallow, and determine. No, I did not get a call, and I will say that I'm privileged for that because of the fact that my dad was really good at not giving out our phone numbers at all for any reason, and that became a habit in the family. Second, because when I go back home, I tend to act like you. I don't go back home in a suit. I dress like an autochthon. I don't act like I come back from America. And for you to see me, you will have to go through a certain number of guards. So I only see who I want to see. So that is the point. Second, if I'm going to fund a project, or if I'm going to fund a person, I determine the reason why I'm going to fund that person. I am not going to fund your next Hollandese. I am going to fund what is going to deem you to become self-sufficient so that you do not call me again. That's what I allow. That is why I don't get phone calls. Because if you call me once or twice or 3 times and you don't get what you need, your Hollandese is not coming, you're not going to call me again. Now, I really felt the itch to address the idea and the resource part. There is something that all of us can do. And it all depends on our capacities, our possibilities, and what we've been dreaming of ever since we've decided to either stay abroad, go back to Africa, go back and forth. I can only give my experience. I knew since my 20s when I got here that I would go back to Africa. I will not go back because I've retired at age 65. I've worked with the state long enough to know that the people that I interacted with that retired at full retirement age, within 2-3 years, I was at their funerals. No, I am not wishing it on anyone. It is a reality, and a study actually came out about it this year, that if you wait until full retirement age to retire, you may not enjoy what you spent 40 years of your life doing. And newsflash, Social Security may not be there for you either, so start saving. So I always planned that I was going to retire at age 50, no later than age 55, because I would have paid my dues to my kids, and the resource would not come from ideas. It would come from what I have saved in my life insurance policies, in my retirement plans, and when I go back, I would for sure have found somebody like you, Duke, on my way, because my plan would be to open an orphanage that would be self-funded due to the fact that my father has acres of land that I would want to make sure to use the acreage to have farms, and the revenue from those farms will sustain my orphanage. I know nothing about agriculture. I know a whole lot about financial literacy. I know a whole lot about self-sufficiency. I know a whole lot about education. And I'm not talking the education part where students go to school and see everything that is good about abroad, but will learn everything that is good right where they are. That's my plan. That's my resources. It does not involve any government. It does not involve anything but the people that will have the same mindset as me and will be willing to invest because revenue is coming. That's the way for me to do resourcing. If you think about big ideas and you wait it on an African, a European, or an American government, it's not going to happen. And I don't think people in the diaspora should be waiting for that. because we'll be waiting forever. Culture shifts happen because people move. You have to move. You have to move. You have to move. You don't wait for people to move before you do. You get the idea, you put it into fruition, people join the movement, you move together. That's my philosophy about it. It could be that, it could be something else, I don't know, but until I'm proven otherwise, that's the way I'm going to go about it.
Let me pick up on that.
Let me pick up on it. So, I'm just going to summarize just the tail end of what Amma was saying, which is that we have to break the culture of dependency. Now, this doesn't mean that if you have some uncle who's suffering from debilitating back problems and you have some funds you can help for surgery, that you say, go get your own money, uncle. No, that doesn't mean that. But I'm talking fundamentally, we have to break the culture of dependency. I know a friend of mine here in this country, Sierra Leonean, and every so many years she'll ship a car to some of her siblings in Sierra Leone. Nothing wrong with that. But tell me if you think there's something off with this next part. Those siblings and family friends and the people in the neighborhood will drive the car. Let's say it's a Nissan van or some Mercedes-Benz she used to drive or what have you. They will drive it in SL, in Freetown. And then, when the car breaks down or need new tires or new brakes, they'll call her and say, hey, and then she'll dole out some more dollars to fix the car. Meanwhile, she probably visited that place maybe 3 weeks out of an entire year. That is a trivial example of the culture of dependency. Now, let's talk about the more macro example, which is that big charitable organizations come to Ghana, Togo, and other parts of Africa, and they're helping folks, right? And then that allows our folks not to take care of themselves, right? There was an entrepreneur in some country, I don't know if it was Cameroon or one of these countries in maybe along the eastern seaboard of Africa, and she was saying that there's a company here in the US that makes shoes, I think it's Keen or something, and for every pair of shoes that is sold here in the United States, they give free pair of shoes to somebody in somewhere in Africa. And that woman was livid. And she said, stop giving free shoes to my people here because the shoemakers are now going out of business. So our culture of dependency has to be broken. One quick fact, and then I will turn over to Ian here. I don't know the last time, I haven't checked it recently, but the last time I checked, every single year, $60 billion in aid or in other form of money support flows from the West into different parts of Africa. 60 billion. Think about that for 1 minute. Now ask yourself the next question. How much of that 60 billion stays in Africa? I'll let you guys just go Google it. It's not much. So for instance, the Chinese government will say, yeah, we're going to build some roads in Uganda. And oh, by the way, Amma, our top engineer from China, is going to lead the project. Amma needs to be paid, and Amma brings the money back to Shanghai or whatever city or town she lives in China. So the money just goes through and transfers. So Africa then in finance becomes what we call a pass-through account. How many of you live paycheck to paycheck? Don't raise your hand. But when you live paycheck to paycheck, your bank account is called a pass-through account. You just receive the money from your company and it goes to the businesses. That's what Africa has become.
Amen to that. You know, the thing about that I'm really enjoying about this conversation is that we're being real with each other. We're being super real with each other, and I like that. Some of the things we're talking about are really hard to talk about. They're really hard to think about, but that's what's really going on. Two things for you. One is we have been enablers. We have enabled our own continent to be what it is today, starting from our cousins, brothers, sisters. I have 8 siblings, and I know a thing or two. Thank God you don't get any phone calls, but I probably got 3 sitting over here, right? Because that's just I used to pick up these phone calls all the time because I thought the world was ending. My brother, my sister, my dad, my mom was gonna die if I don't pick up the phone. They need help.
Yes.
And you get to a point, I don't know, maybe it's Africa or America, or just I'm much more aware of money and how that whole system works. I realize that they're not dying, right? They are not dying. But what was really most important for me to learn in this entire process is that I was not doing them any service. I was not doing them any good to pick up. I have the money, but is it good that I'm giving them the money? Do I really need to be giving them the money, or do I need to be helping them figure out how they can stand up for themselves? And one day I woke up and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, what are they gonna do when I die? Because at one point, they're gonna call and the phone call won't go through. What are they gonna do? And that's when I realized that I needed to, in my own way, grow up. I needed to grow up and know that if God keeps me safe, God will take care of them. I need to be doing more than that. On the second side, where we need to be, how do we take what we have? How do we take what Kevin's doing, what I'm doing, what you're doing, and how do we take that back home? I think it all comes down to education. It all comes down to education. If we're educated enough now to know this, we need to take that back home, and we need to go back home. That's the other thing, is that we're so good at talking about who is going to take the help. We are the Calvary. We are the help. We are the help.
And Kwame, let me step in front of you.
I wanted to give you just 3 very specific examples of kind of breaking the cultural dependency, right? This could be both micro and macro, right? It could be small or big, right? So, I will be in parts of Ghana. Now, you can go to parts of Ghana that looks like the United States. If you choose to, you will never see Bastard until you, on your way to the airport, you're going to be like, what? I'm in Africa. Right? But chances are you'll probably run into an open-faced gutter that is full of garbage, that has water in it, sewage, and that it's a health hazard. Among other things, it's an incubator for mosquitoes that carry the parasite for malaria, right? So we can break the cultural dependency by somehow educating ourselves to clean up the gutters or have closed gutters. Not folks throw garbage out, and therefore we can sort of cut the problem of mosquito infestation sort of from underneath. At Syngenta, we make chemicals that we can put the chemicals on the wall, like it would be a paint. We can do that. We've done it in parts of Africa. We come, we paint your bedroom. For 6 months, every mosquito that touches the wall dies. We have that chemical, right? But it lasts for 6 months. Well, Syngenta is trying to work with African countries to say that, well, okay, how do we just get rid of the mosquitoes, period? So that's one culture of dependency. The other cultural dependency is the education, right? Our education system is still very colonially based, right? I just put one of my newfound cousins through nursing school. My uncle died. We found out that he had this daughter who was like 27. She just popped up. What? When did you? First of all, who's your mom? And I just put her through 2 years of nursing school. She just finished this past November, literally about a month and a half ago. She's sitting home waiting for me. She says that she's waiting for the government to post her in a position. So that's a cultural dependency, right? And then the third one is, how do we empower people to fix the problems in their communities? There's a guy in Accra, and I don't know the name of his organization. There's a stockpile of garbage that goes from the west to Ghana just about every day. And in there is all these things like copper and computer RAMs and so on and so forth, right? He has an organization that is basically somehow pairing the engineers at the universities in Ghana with these guys who go fishing for recyclable metals, and they're working together. Maybe you know his name, Kevin, but they're working together to kind of reuse some of these materials that they find. And he is teaching these local people who may not otherwise have any level of formal education to try and use these recyclable items or recycle these materials and redirect it or redeploy it into other forms of resources that is renewed, right? How do we do things like what it's been done in Israel for so long, where when you take a shower, it doesn't just go to the sewage. Certain types of dirty water in Israel goes through a different plumbing system. That water is recycled and pumped back into the drinking water system. Or they have reservoirs that is used for, say, flushing the toilet, and one is clean enough for drinking. The US military has the equipment where if they have people out in the field, they can take muddy, dirty, infested water, clean it up and drink it, and it's safe. We have that. So how do we get folks in Ghana, in Togo, in Mozambique, Zimbabwe to do things like that? Ebola. I mean, I thought it was laughable that we were actually panicking that Ebola hit Sierra Leone, Gambia, and Senegal, and maybe parts of Liberia. Ebola made its ugly head into Nigeria, and it was eradicated not eradicated, it was quarantined and fixed just like that, because the Nigerians have the resources in place to deal with the problem. But Sierra Leone, Senegal, particularly Gambia and Liberia didn't have that. Guinea rather, not Gambia. Okay? All right, sorry, Kwame.
That's okay. So I don't think I want to say much, but you guys mentioned about education. I think that is important. But I think, especially in my country, Ghana, you do have people like us who have the PhDs and the master's degree, and they go back, and then the new government in power comes in and says, hey, you guys are smart, I'm going to bring you to power. When they go in there, they have all these brilliant ideas that they want to do. But when you go in there, it doesn't work that way.
Small boy.
It does not work that way. And so the politics is also part of it. It's just not that easy. So, there's so much that goes into it than just all the ideas, and you gotta have the right networks. And if you do have the right networks, you have to make sure that those right networks with the other guys to make things a reality. So it's very, 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 very difficult. But it's just all about, our mindset is part of it. There's this minister in Ghana called Kenneth Japon. He always says that, quote unquote, Africans are naturally born bad. Naturally born bad. He always says that. He always says that.
Someone needs to send
Because
an email.
of the way we think.
Yeah.
Just because of the way we think. And the greediness in us. So he always says that with the African people. But the way we think that's why we're not progressing. So there's just so much that goes into it. Yeah.
One more thing, and I think I just want to touch on what you just said when it comes to politics. When it comes to politics, a couple of things that have to.
Because for a second, because that was gonna build into my next question. Then you can all put that in. And you go
Because
first.
again, the elephant in the room is, like I said, I do business in Africa, and the challenges that I face there are so many in all levels. But one of the biggest one is the government and the politics in the government. And I came to realize that you can have such a big heart for Africa. You can have all the compassion, you can have all the desire, the zeal, the passion, you name it, to go back and do something that is going to uplift your community and kind of move people out of poverty, if you will. But the government stops us in the tracks. And my question is, what do we as Africans in diaspora and these people sitting in this room and millions more out there, do you guys think that collectively we can be able to influence this type of behavior in our government so we can go past this challenge? Like you mentioned that, it's not just the ideas. We have the perfect ideas. It will work. But now you have these other people that think differently from you, and they see you from a different lens. How do we get on that table where we say, hey, we're coming in and we can negotiate, and you make it possible, you make it feasible for us to come in and be able to do things? Because I tell you, 80% of the time, that's the biggest challenge people face. I face that every day. I'm persistent, but boy, these guys are up in your face every time they come up with a new scheme. Seriously. You think you figured them out, they put out a different color. So how do we collectively, as individuals, as organizations, like Engineer Africa and other organizations and community groups that we belong to, how can we come together and be able to influence that? Is that even a possibility? So I'll let you go first, Ian.
Thank you. I think a couple of things have to happen. One, we, unfortunately in Africa, there's this notion somehow that we can change things overnight, especially when it comes to politics and power. Power is so entrenched that you cannot walk in and just change things. Now, so that brings me to what I believe we need to be doing. One is we need to be building coalitions and movements, both from the diaspora, realizing that we're pumping, what is it right now, $2.something billion that is pumped back in Africa, but we can't somehow use that to influence what's happening, right? They're taking that, and we're not doing anything about that. Well, we're getting to a point where we're realizing that before you pick up a gun and go take out an entire regime, I think you need to realize where is their power. Democracies are not all about picking up guns and weapons and fighting. Democracy is much more than that. Part of it is building coalitions and movements. I think what we are doing here, Kevin, and so many of us, that what we're doing is we're building coalitions and movements and then asking ourselves, what could we be doing with this newfound knowledge and how we do things, right? And then, on the other hand, we need to be partnering up with our people back home, and number one, educating them on what democracy is even all about. How do you build a coalition, right? I think those are the two things that I believe we need to be doing long before, we go in and say, well, I know that I have these obstacles, and those things happen. It's really hard for you to go in and change things the way they are today. So then we need to be thinking about how do we gradually affect that change. And it starts with education and building coalitions. That's how it works here. I think we can all, without getting into too much of what my thoughts are about this place, we can all agree that really the only time things move and change in these countries is when coalitions and movements are built. That's the only time anything ever changes. And we're in America, but we still need movements for anything to happen. What about back home? You cannot changing one. If you were the president and I took you out, that has nothing to do with changing the regime and the way things are done. It has nothing to do with it.
Looking at this camera and thinking that I need to ask a question to my husband and put him on the spot. Sir, do I have permission to speak?
No.
See, I said it. Because I don't have permission to speak, I won't ask you the question I was going to ask you as to the fact that how frank do you want me to be? I would just give out a few examples of reality. I mean no disrespect, Ian, because I totally get your point as to the building of coalition. I just want to bring it back to the African reality of how things are done, at least where I come from. You want something to move, really move. You build coalitions and you get people to go out, they're going to get killed. you go to a power player and you make sure that you have fufu with a very generous amount of fufu meat on the table, especially on a Sunday. Believe me, Monday morning things will move. I will not get into the beautiful woman part because we know how that ends. We know how that ends. We know how that ends, and that's something that I combat a lot because I counsel women out of it, so that's why I won't get into it. But seriously, in our reality, that's how you get things to move. You get a power player, you get them what they need, except your body, hopefully, things will move, right? You brought up, rightfully, the question of power. Power gets things to move. In our reality, let's just take one simple example of what happens during elections in Africa. What do our power players do? They don't want the people to communicate with the outside world. They cut off the internet. The diaspora can organize and build coalitions all they want. When they get on the ground, if they don't find something powerful, the way the colonials still do, because they can get into banks and hold veto power over money that we are supposed to manage. They can decide who we bank with, who we do transactions with, how things are done, who we associate with, just because they have that power. If we don't find a way to get that power in order to be on equal footing, we're not moving. I'm going to stop here because I don't have permission to move forward.
Those are really valid points. And I think most of us are well aware of that. But what I'm really talking about is that if we're really going to have any kind of seismic shift and change in the way business is done in Africa, which I believe is happening today, right? There has to be gradual work towards that. Now, you're right. Today, the way things stand, you're right. I have to go and find a power player that I need to get right with. I get that part. But as time moves on, as we get in there, because what's going to happen, unless, again, we change the way business is being done, what you're really trying to tell me is that for as long as we're going to be here, it doesn't matter how much we're building, and as long as nothing changes back home, we're always going to be in the same place. We could be talking about this 20 years.
Yeah, I wish you understood me halfway. I gave you the reality of now. I also gave you in a few words what we need to do to change the reality of now. We know the power players. We know what power represents. We need to find the means to take that power. Finding the means comes in different ways. What represents power in our countries? Those different means are on the table. I don't think we're ready to discuss it on this platform.
You're right. We'll rest that. We'll rest
Yeah. Well, so the people in government, right? We are the people, right? Because you have the older guys who are going to at some point go out of power. They're going to get old after 4 years. They're going to go. You're going to have new guys coming in. Those new guys are still our generation. The guys are from college. My mate is an MP, a member of parliament. He's my mate, but he goes into power. It's a whole different kind of human being. And so it's our own people, right? And so you take in there, you go in there, you get a network. But it's not like a really old folk. It's still the young generation. So when the corruption starts, the young folks get to know how it is. When they get up there, they don't stop. They continue it.
Yeah.
So when you are here trying to get in, you can't get in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the way it just works.
I mean, that is if we're talking about people. We're not talking about people.
I would say, like, literally 120 seconds, that you know, the realities that you guys are talking about are all true. At the end of the day, I think we, those of us here in the U.S. and other parts of the Western world, you know, people like Kevin, we need to do a lot more collaboration and joining forces together and doing things in these countries that are building things from the grassroots. If we had more time, I'll give an example of that. And I think over time, as economic power begins to change, we can begin to also kind of shift the paradigm a little bit in terms of the cultural evolution that needs to take place. And I think that's where we as a network of professionals in the diaspora can help.
Thank you so much for that response. We can go all night just on that. But again, it's a conversation that we started, and I think that conversation will be carried out of this room. And we encourage you to have those conversations. That's how things get changed. People talk about things. And so I'm going to ask you guys now, being relevant here with Engineer Africa, right? I want to have your own personal opinion in your own area of work. What you think you can bring to the table as far as Engineer Africa is concerned, and if there is any suggestions for Engineer Africa as they forge the way forward towards developing the solutions for our continent. So I'll just have each of you respond to that, and then we will conclude from there. Thanks.
I'll go first. Mine's very quick. When I speak in terms of policy and really influencing power, which my sister obviously you know quite a bit about if you work in government. I think what I believe I could bring, or anybody in a line of work that we could be bringing, because at the end of the day, Kevin, and anybody that's trying to do business back home, you're still going to have to figure out a way to deal with the powers that be back home, and understanding how to navigate that, and who the people are, and maybe what some of the knowledge that we might be able to offer up in terms of navigation and thinking about strategies and policies and what might help as we move forward is something that I see and believe we could be offering up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many people like Kevin and Vitalis, and there's so many people who are doing a lot of things to try and improve the situation in their home countries in Africa, right? I think bringing many of those forces together would be very helpful. So from that standpoint, I agree with you on the collaborative efforts, right? I mean, I know here, right here in the Twin Cities, I can list up at least 5 organizations, not charitable organizations, that are raising money one way or another every year to help with some health cause in different West African countries. And if we can sort of pull our resources together in terms of ideas, in terms of ways of working, benchmarking best practices, I think it would work, or we would begin to make some headway.
When I met Kevin and he talked to me about Engineer Africa, I was really attracted by the core focus of the organization, the affordable housing part, the flood prevention part, the wireless mesh part, the road building. All 4 of them spoke to me. None of them are part of my specialty. The reason why they spoke to me exactly was the fact that it was needed in Africa, and it wasn't my specialty. I thought, well, how is it that I can contribute to this? I could be a member and learn from it, but I could also bring a portion of what I do best. It's not just in project management, but it's also in education. And the fact that you talk about culture shift resonated with me. Culture shift does not happen overnight, and it doesn't happen because you go and use a tambourine to talk to people. It happens because of what you do and because of how you educate people. And education, whether we like it or not, the way it's done right now is just throwing most generation out of whack. It just so happens that we have everything that we need where we are, but we are not using our resources appropriately in order for us to be able to get the best use out of it. So I think that's what I bring based on my experience, whether it be in law, in finance, in government subsidies, and what have you. Able to create that social construct that actually builds upon everything engineering-wise that this group is bringing about. So that's what I hope to be able to bring. And it just so happens that I'm 44 and I'm looking at Kevin in his 20s and I'm like, okay, I need to be able to support this guy because I'm a little selfish on the side. I always think that, okay, I'm gonna do my thing, and if everybody does their thing, we're gonna be able to come up with something big. But it doesn't necessarily always work like that. You need to be able to collaborate and pick up a little in here, pick up a little in here, pick up a little in there. And as much as I like you guys, I figure out that agriculture is my thing, so I'm gonna be sticking to him like glue, right? Collaboration and education. That's what I think I could be bringing.
Yeah, well, what I'm bringing on board is more of my technical expertise in terms of working on big data and data as a whole, taking or dealing with the data that are around the world in terms of information that is coming in and out, whether it's hospital, whether it's the population as a whole. How can we store that data? How can we protect that data? And how can we make that data very useful to make things very easy in terms of how we manipulate data in Africa. And so Kevin, I spoke to Kevin, he has some ideas and I wanted to join that to make some of these pilot programs a reality.
All right, I just want to add really quick that as part of the coalition, because I still believe in coalition, forming partnerships and networking is very important in moving the agenda forward. It doesn't matter which area of work you are involved in. And I just want to mention one that started recently in the Twin Cities. It's called the Diaspora African Men's Empowerment Forum. And it's really powerful. We talk about these things of how we can collectively influence our lives here in different areas, in education, in the policy making, in economic development, and also how we can be able to collaborate in the home front to kind of smoothen the surfaces so that these ideas can actually find a soft landing, if you will. I think that we have so much over here. I mean, we're ready. We have passionate, brilliant people that are experts in their field, a lot of knowledge. But the problem is, we're talking about Mother Africa. And again, like my sister said, the reality in Africa is the reality in Africa. And that's the elephant in the room that we don't want to talk about. But still, it's something that we have to talk about on us. We're going to have our great-grandchildren sitting in a room like this, they're talking about Mother Africa and how they can break through. So we really have to really be intentional about this and look at all fronts, if you will. We are what we think. The philosophy of our mind determines who we are. What we're acting out is the person within us, whether you like it or not. And so are the people back in Africa. They are what they think. It is their mindset. Like you said, mindset is critical. And for me, my investment is to focus on how we can begin to change the generations coming up, the mindset of how we think in Africa. We have been indoctrinated. We have culturally been designed to think in a certain way, if you will. Unconsciously, we pick up on these things, and they exist in our hard drive. We all have a hard drive, if you don't know. And they come out in other ways. So how can we go back and clean that hard drive and make sure we can install information that begins to make us to think and act in the way that we all desire? That is the core of this issue. Africa doesn't lack resources. We're the richest continent in the world. We have resources. We have the minds to be able to put that resources to use. The problem is the way we think in Africa. Aid has failed us. Why? Because it's created dependency syndrome, like you guys have said. We depend on aid. I go to Africa, I travel all over, and all I see people waiting for an aid vehicle to go by, and they follow it. They come to deliver food. They come to give free shoes. They've come to give free medicine. Everything is free. They've taught us not to think. They've taught us to receive. We have to go back and start change that. And there's no other way to do that but through education. We invest in education. Education that addresses this cultural shift. We have to go back and rewrite our hard drive, if you will. Thank you so much. Please give a hand clap for this beautiful gentleman and woman. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate your help. The knowledge is valuable. Thank you. Yes. So please, I encourage you to continue this conversation in your homes, in your groups, at work, with your colleagues, and tap into Engineer Africa. You see, one thing I want to mention about Engineer Africa is this is a platform that you can bring what you have. You can plug into it and be able to have your own talent, your own initiative actually play out in a big stage. A lot of us have ideas, and for years we sit on them. Why? Because we feel like we don't have anywhere where we can be able to pitch our ideas, and it makes sense. And what happens is we fold, and we keep it within. This is great initiative. Please, let's take advantage of it. Everybody can plug into this. You don't have to be an engineer, software, whatever. I am not an engineer. I am plugged in, and I know I can be relevant. You can too. So, thank you very much. So, coming up next, we're gonna have some entertainment here to celebrate this event. So, I would like to, let me see if DJs, are we ready to cue that, DJ? We good? We good to go? Okay, so please, to grace this beautiful event tonight, please put your hands together and welcome on stage DJ Chalo and Nino Ski.
Nino Sky, baby.
How you guys doing? So I go by the name Nino Sky, and this is DJ Chalo Fresh.
Nino Sky, baby.
I'm very impressed by this seminar. It was really nice. Kevin, I want to thank you for inviting us. And I want to just give you guys a little nice vibes. Good song. Ready? Let's go. Now you can stand up and just rock with me, you know. You can stand. Yeah.
Good work. Keep it up. All right.
I say, Baba, Mama, just see my shoe and a lapa. Money no be matter, we dey spend basa. We say lover. Fine, Baba, she dey rock like Coco, hey, jobodo. Waka, see her front and her back. African bottle, she go check up just because. Baby, take your time, no by force, so you go make her marry baby boss. Fire, see your body, fire. Baby, la vida loca, you go never suffer. Sweeter than butter, everything, Hey, jobodo, if you like, I'm confirm it, If you want it, confirm it, You go snipe, I'm confirm it, Hey, I need to say it, yeah. Money go, baby blow, yeah. Money come, da-dum, baby blow, yeah. Baby girl, control them, come, control them, control them, hey, yeah, what? Oh, na, yeah, oh, na, bye. Here we come behind, boss man, better waste my time, African queen, do me something, she gon' make me blow this money, girl I know you want something, oh Lisa, come to Visa, come with Caesar, she give me fever, now me the captain, she's a diva, bad bougie, she's a diva. Rock with me. Hey, money go, baby blow. Hey, money come, Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, give it up to DJ Shallow. Robinski. That was awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you all for coming out. It was awesome. This is the beginning of a new chapter for 2020, Engineer Africa. Oh, okay. Please. Whoa, look at that. We can't walk away with this. It's Saturday, guys. Come on. It's Saturday. All right? Yeah. This one gets me really drunk. So I'm getting wasted after this. But all the same, please. Thank you guys for coming again. It was awesome. We're going to do this again. We're going to come back again and let you know how Engineer Africa is doing. Thank you for the support. Keep supporting us. Get on Facebook. Join the bandwagon. Come on, let's get this straight in Africa. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Should we end it? Yeah.